How do you pick a great steak? Well, stay tuned for my series on beef, my favorite subject. I'm going to discuss all the differences and the different cuts of meat. I've got a lot of experience with beef. I worked in a steakhouse for 9 years. I took 4 cooking courses. I covered all the different cuts extensively, and I've been a carnivore forever. So I've probably eaten more meat than anybody my age in my lifetime. That I know anyway. Alright, so I'm going to show you the differences, and we're going to talk about a few things that you're going to want to look for in the grocery store. Which cuts are better for what? So stay tuned. Here we go. Okay, starting off here, these are the 5 steaks that I would consider your grilling steaks. We've got your Porterhouse, your New York strip, your ribeye, the sirloin, and then the filet. These are the most common steaks you're going to find in grocery stores and restaurants to pick from. So there's a few others that could be grilled, but for the most part, these are your mainstays. Okay, so some basics that you want to look for when picking out a steak. You want a light pink to a bright cherry color. You don't want it too dark red, and this one here is on the verge. It's getting a little deep, and you definitely don't want gray, and we're starting to get just a little bit of gray in there. I only got this because that's the only one they had. I normally wouldn't have picked that one. It'll taste fine. I'm going to eat that one tonight. But if the meat's dark or kind of gross, if it's not dry aged, that is, if it's dark or gray, you don't want to pick it. So look for light cherry or a light pink to a bright cherry color. In grocery stores, there primarily you'll find 3, usually 2, but 3 grades of beef. The U.S. Department of Agriculture grades beef prime, select, or prime, choice, select, and then standard. Standard you probably won't see anywhere, but for the most part, prime almost always goes to restaurants. Fine dining places buy up all the prime that's available. Occasionally, you'll get a better grocery store that might have some available, or if you go to a butcher that can get it in, they can get it for you. But essentially what you're paying for, prime is the highest, is the marbling, the amount of fat in the middle of the meat, not the fat that's coming around the edge of the meat. It's the marbling of the meat. So the more of that, the better. You don't want to pick the leanest looking steak thinking that, oh, it's all meat. It's solid meat, it's going to be delicious. It's not going to be delicious at all. It'll be tough. So starting here with the sirloin, this is the, what I would call your entry-level grilling steak. It's usually the cheapest steak on any restaurant menu, and you can tell why. Very little marbling, very thin amount of fat in there. It's a very lean steak. It's one of the more healthy steaks because there's very little fat, but it's not going to be very tender, and it won't be very juicy. All that comes from the fat. So you sort of get what you pay for with steaks. That's going to be one of the least expensive steaks on the menu, or usually the least expensive steak. Okay, then let's go to the Porterhouse here. Porterhouse is a T-bone. The only difference between a Porterhouse and a T-bone is the size of this side. This is the filet. On one side of the bone you get a strip steak, on the other side you get a filet. So when you're picking a Porterhouse, you're going to be buying per pound, you want to look for one with a big filet side, because this is the most tender piece of meat on a cow. Very tender. So the other side's a strip. So a really nice steak. T-bone, you're going to get a very thin sliver of meat on the filet side, and it'll be almost all strips. You're paying a lot of extra money for the bone and that little sliver of meat on the other side. So T-bones are typically cheaper. Go to the New York strip steak here. Strip's going to be a long steak. It'll have a line of fat to trim off along the one side. The strip is a very meaty steak. It's got a little bit stronger beef flavor. It can be nice and tender too. Some of the best steaks out there are strips. One thing I want to mention, when you're picking a steak, try to look for one that's an inch thick, maybe a little bit more. The thinner the steak, the easier they are to overcook. It's very hard to get to the proper temperature. Over here we have the filet. This is the most tender cut of meat on a cow. You can see here, fillets actually don't get a lot of marbling. So if they have much at all, that's really good. The meat itself is super tender, but if you can find one with good marbling, it's going to be even better. This one, just so you know, the grading here, these are primarily choice grade, with the exception these two are borderline prime. Just because of that marbling score, this is going to be a really good eating steak. The one thing about fillets that's nice is there's really nothing to trim off, so they seem expensive, but you're getting all meat, so it's not as expensive as it seems, because there's nothing going to waste there. An 8-ounce fillet is perfect for, a full-grown man. You don't need a 20-ounce steak like you might with a porterhouse, because there's very little waste. Then we go to what's probably regarded for a true steak lover's steak as the best steak on a cow, the ribeye. The ribeye is actually what they use to grade the whole carcass. They don't look at the sirloin, they don't look at the filet. They cut the cow carcass at the 12th rib, and they actually grade the marbling score based on the ribeye. So you can see here we've got lots of nice marbling. That's why I picked this one. This is a bone-in ribeye, so you get the bone. A lot of people think there's more flavor with a bone-in ribeye, because the meat on the bone actually doesn't get cooked quite as much, and it stays a little juicier. I could go either way on that. I'm not convinced that the bone adds too much flavor, but restaurants swear by it, and they definitely charge for it. But what I look for in a ribeye is great marbling score, and this is the shoulder. When I was a kid, I used to eat out just this center part, and I would leave that and thinking, oh, that's all fat, till I realized that little piece right there of meat is probably the most juicy and delicious piece of meat on a cow, because it's got so much marbling. The fat marbling dissolves when you cook it, so it turns into just juice and flavor. But it's definitely a different flavor than, let's say, a fillet or a strip. It's very rich, a lot of oil in the meat. So you may or may not like that. So it's up to you when you choose that. But if you stick with either of these 4 cuts, you're going to have a wonderful steak. You want to pick a steak too that is firm to the texture and not mushy. This one we're getting borderline there. See how it just kind of stays down? This is a nice firm textured meat. So you want to look for something that's firm. If it's got a nice square cut, what I would call a square cut, like this, that has a nice sharp edge on it, holds its shape, that's a good cut of meat.